set the stage for us. What leads up to the council? What's happening that leads up to the Council of Ephesus?
Okay, so the story starts actually in the mid third century, so from like 260s. And then think about that. So if you're starting a story from 260s, you're talking about a council that happened in 431. That's almost 200 years. It's kind of been building
Mhm.
up to this. There was a patriarch of Antioch. His name was Paul. He believed uh, God, the Word, the second person of the Trinity. He adopted Jesus in baptism. When Jesus, the son of Mary, Jesus of Nazareth, when he was baptized, God, the Word, the second person of the Trinity, united to him, as if there's two he's and two hymns, and then they were united into this kind of personal union
You
between
said
these.
this is Bishop Paul of Antioch?
Yes,
You
in
believe this?
260,
Okay.
260 to 268. So Paul was excommunicated. He was deposed by his own synod of bishops in Antioch. They deposed him and put in an Orthodox patriarch. Paul's nephew, his name is Lucian, Lucian of Antioch. Lucian was the teacher of Arius, who I'm sure you've heard of, and then
Mhm.
Diodore of Tarsus, who we're going to kind of go on that line for this story. Diodore of Tarsus, he set up a school in Antioch. It became very famous. The School of Antioch, it was called. And Diodore believed essentially what Paul believed, but instead of the adoption happening at baptism, it happened in the womb of the Virgin Mary at the moment of conception, because that way it could be kind of hidden into the Trinitarian, you know,
Mhm.
view. And his greatest student was Theodore of Mopsuestia. And by the way, John Chrysostom was a student of his too, but for somehow he kind of came out of this clean. So Theodore of Mopsuestia, he uh, he was very big. He was very important in kind of the Christian world at that time. His biblical commentaries, etc. He had many students, Nestorius being one of them, Theodoret of Cyrus being another, Ibasa of Edessa. He was kind of like the big teacher, the main teacher in that part of the world in the
Was he
Syria.
just a teacher, or was he a clergy?
He was a bishop of
He was a bishop?
Mopsuestia, yeah,
Okay.
and he was a teacher. And so all of this takes us from, we started off in 260,
Mhm.
268. Now we're all the way, now we're in the beginning of the 5th century. Throughout these names we just listed very quickly, so we kind of went over really fast all to the time that we want to get at. Now Theodore, he was so popular that after the Council of Ephesus and after the formula of reunion, the formula of reunion is this kind of um, is the union between Alexandria and Antioch. That's like it's a very delicate union. It's like they kind of know that they don't agree with each other, but they're just signing
Mhm.
it to not be in schism, kind of thing. It happened 2 years after Ephesus. So, in when that was all happening, John of Antioch said, because Cyril's friends were telling Cyril, tell this guy that he needs to anathematize Theodore. And John was like, I would rather burn in hell, and all of us in that school would rather burn in hell than anathematize Theodore. It's never going to happen. So, and even though Cyril wrote against Theodore, he wrote against Theodore. But
So did they not see that he was just teaching the same heresy that they excommunicated Paul of Antioch for? And did they not realize it, or did they realize it and just not care that he was being more slick with it?
well, in their view, we are the ones who are messing up Christologically. Like Cyril is messing up, not them.
Okay.
So, um, and the evidence for this is that one of them, his name is Ibas of Edessa. He writes a letter to the patriarch of the Church of the East of that time,
Mhm.
the Ishar. That's the one who I said he started off kind of from 424 on to set up the framework of that schism. He writes a letter to him, Ibas, and he tells him Cyril repented of the 12 anathemas he wrote. He repented of his Apollinarianism, and that's why we went back into communion with Cyril. So Ibas and the whole Antiochian school is understanding that Cyril and that view is heretical.
Mm,
And Cyril had to repent of that view in order for him to be reconciled to them. It's the opposite of reality, where it
yeah.
was Cyril was taking it, they're the ones repenting and coming into communion with him. So for them, we're the ones who are denying the incarnation. It's like it's subjective in the sense that they're thinking the same thing about us we're thinking about them.
Yeah.
But yeah, they don't think they're wrong about it.
But you said that they excommunicated and selected a new bishop to replace Paul of Antioch, right?
Yes, so
So
Paul
at
was
that
wrong.
point,
Paul was wrong
but
to them because he was saying it was happening at baptism.
okay, so it was just a timing thing for them
Yes,
that he was saying it at baptism, but once I forget who you said started preaching it at conception or
Theodore, yeah. Theodore was saying
Theodore.
and then Theodore really kind of he Theodore was the one who put it all together. He's the one who
Okay,
kind of filled in all the gaps for them.
so it's more of an evolution of that initial heresy. Is that accurate? Like it just evolved and became more sophisticated?
I would say so. Like on the Syriac list of anathemas, we always list Paul with them. Like he's in their category. He's not like a separate thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you set the stage that this kind of heresy wasn't like some new heresy that came out of nowhere. Um,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
y-
It has a heritage. It has like a you could follow the line down.
okay.
And so then even afterwards, even after this kind of this 431 controversy with um Nestorius and whatever, 449 Ephesus, it's not over. Like Dioscoros tries to end the whole school. That's the whole point of Ephesus too. Dominus,
Mhm.
who's John's nephew, is now Patriarch of Antioch. Theodoret is doing the Nestorius stuff. Ibas is writing that letter. He's trying to still fight the same thing. And then in the eyes of Alexandria, Egypt, that's the Antiochian side wins at Chalcedon. Like that's what they were trying to do this whole time, kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. So rewind again. So Nestorius is before Theodoret.
They're peers.
They're peers. Okay.
Yeah.
But you had said Theodoret was gaining a lot of popularity at that time.
Yeah. Big time.
Okay. And then John, you said of Antioch, was like we're not forsaking any of these guys who'd rather burn in hell.
Exactly.
So that
Exactly.
became very clear, and so then it became like a watershed moment. Like we have to address this with the how does that get decided? Like we have to address this formally with a council now because these guys aren't repenting of this view.
It was always an emperor who called the council. The bishops, the patriarchs, they didn't think of that as their first option. So, like for example, with Ephesus, uh, you know, Nestorius was patriarch of Constantinople. There's the famous homily where him, like the visiting bishop or whatever, says, "Call Mary the Christokos, not Theotokos." And then the people of Constantinople write to Cyril. Cyril writes to Nestorius. He tells him, "I don't believe that. You're a good guy. I'm sure that's not true." And Nestorius goes, "No, that is true." And he talks to him in a very prideful way to Cyril. Cyril was very like nice. People always flip that. They make Cyril look like the bad guy. I'm not sure why. Cyril was actually his tone is very very kind, and so he writes back to Nestorius. He tells him, "What do you mean? Like that's not what we received. We received this." And he tells him, and then Nestorius again writes back to him and very haughtily, and then Cyril then kind of lays the smackdown in the third letter.
When they're writing these letters back and forth to each other, do you think they're intending it to be read by a wider audience, or is it actually a personal letter to this guy?
Um, it's I don't
Like, is it
know
is
if
it meant to be part of history from their point of view? Like, I need to lay this all out,
there's
in
nothing that
great
indicates.
detail.
Yeah,
Mhm.
you can't tell that from the letter, and I don't think it was meant to be that way. It turned out that way, like, in their lifetime,
Yeah.
like, Cyril's letters to Nestorius were read in the council,
Yeah,
so it
'cause
eventually became.
I asked that as a lawyer because a lot of what I do is, like, write correspondence to the opposing side, but, like,
Yeah,
most of the time it's just with aim for, like, this is gonna be introduced as evidence later, or the judge is gonna see this or whatever, so I write it obviously differently.
yeah, yeah.
So, you think they had that in mind?
I don't
Or they're
think
just writing a letter to another bishop like, "Hey, I heard this, and I think, reconsider."
I don't think, Cyril was thinking that there was going to be a council
Mhm.
and that his letters would be read there. I think, if anything, he could have thought after he wrote the letters, he could have thought, "You know what? And I'm gonna send these letters to these other bishops," kinda thing. But I don't think he thought
Okay.
there's gonna be a council and they're gonna be
So
read
he's
there.
not, like, CCing the emperor on it, like, "Yo, here's a copy for
No,
you too."
no, no. The
Okay,
emperor was on
okay,
Nestorius' side at the time.
okay.
But Cyril, he sent his letters to the Pope of Rome, Celestine, and Nestorius did too.
The same letters they were sending to each other, they sent to Pope
Yeah,
Celestine? Okay.
yeah, they did, and but Cyril
Why?
was smart because they wanted, like, a tiebreaker. So, Cyril had his letters translated into Latin, which was very smart of him. Nestorius didn't. He sent his letters in Greek, so it took time for his letters to get translated when they got there. Cyril did that already. So then Rome, the Pope of Rome, already had this clear understanding of what Cyril's saying, versus Nestorius, who had to kind of figure it out, you know.
Yeah.
And so the Pope, he sided with Cyril, and he told Nestorius, "You have 2 weeks to recant, or else we're going to excommunicate you." And then the emperor got involved on behalf of Nestorius, and he said, "Hold on, guys, we're going to do a council. No
What
excommunicate."
yeah. The Pope Celestine, does he have is that common? Does he have, like Does is Cyril writing to him and Nestorius writing to him, making it clear, "Hey, we want you to be a tiebreaker," and then, like, he's gonna decide who gets excommunicated, or did he just overstep there, or
What Cyril says to him is, I don't want to excommunicate him before I talk to you first."
Mm, mm,
That's what Cyril says to Celestine.
okay.
Yeah,
But so in Cyril's point of view, he could have, if he felt it was necessary, just excommunicated him?
certainly.
What does that mean exactly? Like, what does it mean to excommunicate somebody, and who has authority to do that?
It's a great question. So excommunion versus communion, right?
Mhm.
So if you're in communion, that's the fullest form of unity. When you're an excommunicate, you're not in communion together. That means you don't receive the Eucharist with the other person. In this case, they live in different cities. So what does it mean? It's not like they're physically in the same place. It means they're not commemorating each other in the liturgy. So I'm not sure if I know every Coptic parish is different, whether they say this particular prayer or not. But the regular form is for you guys to mention our patriarch in your liturgy, and we
Yeah,
mention
we
your
do.
patriarch. Yeah,
Mhm.
and we mention yours. So it's showing that we're in communion together. So they stopped commemorate, like, if someone would excommunicate someone, a bishop or a patriarch would excommunicate the other, they would stop commemorating them in the liturgy. If it's for a lay person is different. It's just like, just leave. You can't come anymore, But for
Okay,
the
so say he excommunicated Nestorius,
Mhm.
meaning he's not commemorating him in the liturgy anymore. What else does it mean? Like, can Nestorius keep doing his thing as normal, and can he
So
I
if
mean,
since we believe Cyril's side is the right side, is the Orthodox side, that would mean Nestorius is excommunicated from the Church of God. Like, he's
okay.
outside. family.
Got
If
it.
he would die in that situation, it would be
Okay.
very dire for him. Be a very grave situation.
Okay. So yeah, sorry. So it's outside of the body of the church, not just outside of your name's not mentioned anymore. Um, and was there like would there be an expectation if Cyril did it that Pope Celestine would follow and do the same thing?
Well, look,
Or does he have his own authority to decide if he wants to do that?
Cyril did not, I think it's fair to say, Cyril did not view himself to have universal jurisdiction, meaning if Cyril excommunicated somebody, as far as he's concerned, that person's excommunicated. But does that mean that person is excommunicated universally? What
Mm,
if only Cyril excommunicated him, but Celestine didn't? And Celestine is still in communion with Cyril. So then, by extension, Nestorius would stay in communion with Cyril through Celestine, right?
got it. Yeah.
So if both of them excommunicate him, then it's like, okay, he's out. And they wrote to the other bishops. They're like, hey, we're going to excommunicate him. You guys should too. That's what they told them.
Okay, so other than these three C's, is there anybody else who's a major player that Cyril is looking for some, kind of support or deferring to at all?
John of Antioch, he wrote to him, but John was on Nestorius' side. Um, Rabula of Edessa, although being under Antioch, was with Cyril. Um, and then there was Acacius of Melite, Theodotus of Ancyra. These are huge Miaphysite bishops. Like their homilies
Okay.
at Ephesus were very big. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's continue this story. So uh, Pope Celestine sends Nestorius this letter. Hey, you got 2 weeks to take it all back, or you're excommunicated.
Yeah.
And then what happens next?
So Theodosius, the emperor at the time, he was on Nestorius' side. He was Nestorius' friend. So he's like, let's not do that. We're gonna have a council, and you guys can all be here, and you guys can talk about it. And Rome had given Cyril their like representation. So Cyril was now going to Ephesus representing both churches, Rome and Alexandria. Nestorius, obviously of Constantinople, John of Antioch is going. So they get there, they get to Ephesus to do the council. So the excommunication ultimatum of Celestine is like not applicable now because it's replaced with this council idea. John of Antioch, like I said, he doesn't show up on time. He sends a guy ahead of him. He gives Cyril a letter, says, "Hey, I might be late, like a week or so. If I don't get there, you can feel free to start." He tells him. So so Cyril, the week, it passes June 22nd. Cyril starts the council. John gets there. When Cyril starts the council, he excommunicates Nestorius right away. Nestorius was in the city, but he didn't show up because he was waiting for his friends to get there. But so he excommunicates Nestorius, who is absent. And then Nestorius's party shows up. John, Theodoret, all those guys, they show up, and they're mad that Cyril started everything, excommunicated Nestorius. They have their own council. At that council, they excommunicate Cyril and all the bishops on that side. They condemn Cyril for the 12 anathemas. They say they're Apollinarian.
Do
So that,
they excommunicate Pope Celestine?
yeah, they excommunicated the whole council and everyone who's represented at the council. Yeah.
So this is a minority doing this at their council, right?
The
Or like,
numbers, the number of that synod, I think, were smaller than our version of it. They had Constantinople and Antioch, and we had Rome and Alexandria there.
mhm.
So it's two.
So So how are these? How is the council supposed to work? I mean, Nestorius is not there. Who makes Cyril in charge, like to run
Uh,
it and decide what happens?
so there was precedent that Alexandria was presiding over councils. That was already a thing. Um, since Alexandria now is representing two major sees, Rome and Alexandria, so they're going to preside. Nestorius actually complained about this. He's like, what is this? He's like, Cyril's the presiding and he's representing Rome. It's like the guy that I'm fighting with, and he's the judge of
An
this.
executioner, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Um, and so what's the state's role in this at the council?
They were just like it always is, usually is, where they would kind of just see whatever they come up with, and then whatever you guys come up with, that will be the law. And
Okay.
so, but when there was two councils and two opposite decisions, the emperor accepted both of them. Both became the law. And so both Cyril and Nestorius were excommunicated and exiled
Wait, why did he do that?
because he didn't know like which one to agree
Oh.
with. So he just said, okay, both of them.
Why was
Because
he
he's
friends with
Catholic.
Nestorius?
It was a thing that the emperor of Constantinople was always the friend of the patriarch of Constantinople. He would pick him, you see.
Got it. Okay. So the
Um,
emperor really, he doesn't really have a dog in the fight. He doesn't care. He just wants them to figure out some sort of
unity,
resolution,
exactly,
unity,
for the sake of the
uh,
empire. Yeah,
why for the sake of the empire.
like you can't have a
Contextually, outside of this like theological battle, is there something going on historically that's relevant or important, like a war or some kind of famine or like is there anything you're aware of that would add context that's important to know?
the 5th century. Rome was already kind of backing away from Greek. They didn't know Greek anymore. The western half of the empire was very close to falling. They were already kind of uh, becoming disunited from the main part of the empire, the eastern half. So there was a lot of that going on. A lot of the Germanic barbarian tribes kind of invading in the west, and obviously you have the Persian problems in the east.
Hmm.
But so it was very important for the emperors that the empire remain united, especially in religion, because that was such a big part of life at the time. So that you can have as strong as an empire as possible. That's why the emperors cared so much.
I mean, would people have even noticed? Like everyday people going to church and just like
Bro,
regular day life would
there's
honestly, how would
there's a
it have
story.
affected?
There's a story where a woman, she took a Chalcedonian Eucharist. This is in the 5th century, so same century.
Hmm.
She took a Chalcedonian Eucharist. Her husband found out. He choked her until she vomited it.
Wow.
Yeah. There's another story. The Chalcedonians, they forced.
Are these myths like
No, no,
that
these are
came
real
up
stories.
later? Is a real
These,
story?
yeah, it's a real story.
Okay.
Um, there's a story where the Chalcedonians forced a non-Chalcedonian monk to receive their Eucharist, and he spit it out, and then they burned him to death.
So this wasn't just at the really high level, like, bishops fighting amongst each other. Like it affected the people on the ground, like real
Oh,
people.
for sure.
Real
Absolutely.
people had a stake in this and they cared.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
But why?
This
Like I would expect your normal person wouldn't even understand that there was a heresy if you explained it to them.
There was a
I
lot of
mean,
zeal. Like the liturgy was the way in which the people understood orthodoxy. It wasn't in church fathers or scripture or councils. It was liturgy. That was the way they understood what they believed for the layperson. So when you have in the liturgy, you're saying every time, you who were crucified for us. When you're saying that, when you're saying, Holy God, holy mighty, holy mortal, you who were crucified for us, have mercy on us. Then all of a
mhm.
sudden, somebody takes out, you were crucified for us. You were crucified. What is this? Why? and there's going to be riots in the street.
Got
This is
it.
the Middle
Okay.
East we're talking about. Yeah.
So it wasn't just we're understanding things differently. It's because we're understanding things differently, it's going to affect actually the words used in liturgy, how we
Mhm.
pray, things like that.
Right.
Got it. So you gave one example that they would take out the who was crucified for us. Anything else that you can think of that um, adopting Nestorius's point of view would have, or that he tried to change, or his followers, it, things they
Yeah.
introduced that were just
To to
different.
say to say that when you're changing the liturgy like that, to say this, initially you have to think of now what they say is, oh no, we mean it's to be Trinitarian, that's why. But that's not historically true. So the reason why you changed it initially is because even though you thought it was Christological, you stopped believing that it was God who was crucified.
Mm,
So, and if you think about it, like the third phrase, holy immortal, right? Holy immortal, and you say that's about the Holy Spirit. Why? Who doubted the Holy Spirit is immortal? That's not the point. The whole point is the oxymoronical thing of the immortal one died on the cross.
mhm,
That's the idea.
yeah.
So there's that. There are a lot of other things. There are people you canonize in the liturgy. That's important. Like the diptychs when you say the names of the saints. So if you're saying particular people versus others, it's like that's your way of saying who the heroes and the villains are. And obviously, in that
Mm,
time, they were saying the cursed people too, like the anathemas. So if you didn't have your right people on the right spot of
yeah.
the list, people would be upset. And then it wasn't like the world was as big as it is now, like where you don't know the people personally. Like maybe you know them and you remember them and they were super holy and whatever. And now this
Right, right.
cursing that person.
So were changes made that rapidly? Like people were added, removed from liturgies, and someone
Yeah.
just said, "Okay, we're not saying who was crucified for us." Like,
When you're making a statement of orthodoxy, you're trying to convince the people of something because there was a controversy and now there's a reaction to the controversy. So
mm-hmm,
that implements an immediate change. For example, the Oriental Orthodox churches never had an iconoclasm. So because we never had an iconoclasm, we never had a reaction of like going overboard with icons because we never had people attacking icons in the first place. We
yeah,
didn't we could have just we were just organic with icons. We didn't care. Whereas the Eastern Orthodox, they had an iconoclasm. So now their churches are like a reaction to people being against icons. So for when these controversies were happening, the church and the law would take a position to counter that in a reactionary way for
hmm,
everybody to understand that's wrong and here's why.
got it, got it. Okay, all right. So before we continue with the chronology, the history, what happened, um, let's more explicitly get into the actual heresy. If you can, like, kind of outline again what Nestorius was teaching at this time, what Cyril was specifically saying to him to refute it, and where the disconnect was.
Sure. So Nestorius was saying essentially that Christ is two natures after the union. All the polemic stuff about Nestorius and Nestorianism after it wouldn't be we wouldn't be honest about Nestorius if we're going along with that. Like he never said two sons. He never said two persons. He just said there's two natures after the union. And when Chalcedon happened in the Tome of Leo, he's like, thank God. he was alive. He's like, thank God, that's what I was trying to say this whole time.
Okay.
And he's like, and Chalcedon anathematizes him. So he said, yeah, fine, I accept my anathema to Nestorius. Nestorius himself said that. He said, anathema to Nestorius, orthodoxy wins. Like that's all he was trying to do. And that's what his school of thought is. Like all of them, Theodore, all those guys. I made a video on a review of a review. So there was, I don't know if you heard of him, Marmari. He's an Assyrian bishop in Australia. And David Erhan made a review of his video. So I made a
Mhm.
review of David Erhan's review of Marmari's video because the Eastern Orthodox are trying to show, oh man, look at these, Assyrians. They're making, they're so heretical with their two natures after the union, but it's like you believe the same thing, and the only difference is because these guys are canonizing Nestorius, that's what makes them wrong. But there's nothing
Yeah.
actually substantial. What is the actual substance, the difference in Christology? I'm not understanding. So
Mhm.
Nestorius, when he's saying that, and Theodoret accepts it, Theodoret, it's funny because in the Chalcedonian tradition, they call Theodoret blessed. They call him blessed Theodoret. But they anathematized all his writings because his writings are against Cyril. So imagine you have someone in your church who you say is blessed. He's in heaven. He's blessed. But you can't read anything he wrote because everything he wrote is heretical.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what it's like. It's this kind of revisionist
yeah,
kharbata, It's a
yeah.
mess. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't wanna take anything for granted. So
Mhm.
why exactly is saying two natures heretical? Or what does
Sure.
that mean?
Firstly, because Ephesus condemns it. That's the easy answer. If we're going into it, you have to think from a place of application, like spiritual, um, like what is it? A biblical systematic theology. So
Mhm.
Saint Severus, he gives us the example of the one who walked on water. He says, "It's foreign to the divine nature to have feet to walk, and it's foreign to the human nature to walk on water." So, which nature was it that walked on the water? Is the one incarnate nature.
Mm.
Jesus, when he calmed the storm, when he was on the boat, he was sleeping. They woke him up from his sleep, and he calmed the storm. Who calmed the storm is the same one who was sleeping. Does God sleep, or does a human calm the storm? But it's the one incarnate nature. Revelation 1, he says, I am the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega. A few verses later, he says, I am the first and the last and the living one, and I was dead. So the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega, the eternal one, he's the one who died for us.
Mhm.
Now, this is the thing is that the 12 anathemas of Cyril, we take those as inspired, just like the Council of Nicaea, the Creed of Nicaea. They're equal to us. The 12 anathemas, the fourth one, I think, it says you can't separate, you can't take verses and say this is the human nature and verses and say this is the divine nature. In everything he does and says as God, man at the same time. That's why we have salvation. So it's important because when you divide the natures, then the whole story of salvation goes away. Because if only
Mhm.
a human went through the human stuff, then how are we saved? The whole way we're saved is because God went through this and experienced this and redeemed us and restored us. So when
Yeah,
he put on humanity, he restored humanity. And only God can die for all of men. Not a man can't die for everybody.
right. So what problem were the Nestorians trying to solve by having two natures? Was it just that, oh, we can't say that God, slept? Like what compelled them to push this Christology, and like what bothered them about the Cyrillian Christology?
So ironically, they're trying to preserve. the humanity. They're trying to preserve the unity of the natures by doing this in their mind. They're trying to like preserve the integrity of it, because for them we're dissolving the union,
Mm.
and for them they're preserving it by saying, see, there he's completely two, he's perfectly two and united. There's no mixing happening. He's preserving both natures in their completeness. But what they're missing is that when they're doing that, there is no incarnation. There's
So
no unity.
what would be some you gave some examples of the application of saying one nature. What would be their how would they apply it? Like to
Well,
God
like
or the
for
verses?
example, from the tome of Leo, Leo says, it's not the same one who said the Father is greater than I. He's not the same as the one who said, uh, I and the Father are one.
Mhm.
So,
Got it.
yeah.
Okay. That's Leo, but what about like did Nestorius specifically say anything that
Yeah, he gives a lot of examples. I think he uses the example of the Magi who uh, they come to worship. He says the one who is clothes himself in the baby and not the
yeah.
baby. When and then he uses the example of how Jesus grew in grace and truth when he was younger. Um, things like that.
Yeah. I got to say I feel like those incorrect applications I guess are not that foreign. I feel like I hear them still
Yeah, I
quite
agree.
often. Yeah.
Yeah, I do
E-
too.
even within my church.
Within us. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I agree. It's
So doesn't
ignorant.
that show like it's is it a fine obviously the people I hear in my church aren't intending to intending to espouse
Mm,
an orthodox view.
yeah,
Um so what's going on there? Is just slipping up, making mistakes? Is it
exactly.
so close that you really have to be thinking about it consciously?
I think that it's probably the most important doctrine in Christianity. The Christology and the Trinity are the most important things. So
Mhm.
if we're not thinking about them, then what are we thinking about in Christianity? Like if we're not being careful, if we're slipping up in this type of thing, then what's left? Like, yeah, okay, love your neighbor. Everybody's saying that. The Mormons are saying that. But this is the orthodoxy part of it that orthopraxy comes from, is how we understand salvation history, how we're saved. So yes, it is happening in the parishes, but it's because of ignorance. It's because of a lack of knowledge, and I think when a renaissance happens in our patristic tradition, and I have optimism in the upcoming generations. I don't think that will be happening anymore. You
Mm.
can't you can't go you can't go to a church, like if I'm doing the morning doxology or the morning prayers with you guys, the Coptic Church, and I'm saying how Dioscoros fought against the heretics, which you guys say every morning. Well, who are the heretics? Who did Dioscoros fight against? He fought against Leo, and he fought against those guys. So when I go to their church and I'm seeing an icon of Leo, like, yeah, it's all the same. It's all a big misunderstanding. Well, then everybody was stupid this whole time. Like, I don't understand. You know?
I was telling you before we got online, like how in researching for this, I realized, man, I don't know Jack. And it's because just because of that, what you just said, I feel like what ends up being taught is like, uh, oh, it's just all political. It's a misunderstanding of words. I feel like that's what I was always told about the schism at Chalcedon. Like, oh, we all believe the same thing. It's just a misunderstanding, political, and it was kind of just left at that. But you're saying, no, that's wrong. These were real disagreements, and they didn't excommunicate each other just for fun.
I mean, it's a Protestant argument, really. It's the same thing. It's like if you find the Bible today and you're interpreting it on your own without the 2,000-year-old tradition that that it comes from, and you think you understand it better than the 2,000 years of tradition that it comes from. It's the same thing. It's like, okay, we received this situation. The fathers didn't understand. They excommunicated each other, but they didn't understand what they were doing. We understand better now than they did. See, I think it's
Yeah,
the same.
good point. Good point. Okay, so where we left off is Cyril presided, excommunicated Nestorius. They were like, yo, you didn't wait for us. What are you doing? We're going to excommunicate you back.
Yeah.
The emperor adopts both resolutions. And so
Uh,
none of them has supremacy, or like what's you said both are imperial law at this point?
yeah, both are imperial law. And then what happens? So
Wait, so on that point then, I didn't
yeah.
know that both were I didn't know that happened and both were imperial law. So how can you say that Ephesus was a ecumenical council?
What do you mean? What's the relation? Oh, because of the emperor thing you're saying?
Right, because if there's something contradictory, that's also imperial law, and does that not matter? Or
Um,
oh, well, how much later did that other council happen? Like, is this like almost simultaneous that both are adopted, or
so okay, the emperor, because he doesn't have a horse in the race, and because he's pissed that the whole point of him calling for a council was to squash this, and then the opposite happened. That the two councils happened, and then there was no result. Like it was the opposite of what he wanted, right? So then
yeah.
he was like, "Okay, I'm gonna punish both of you guys. I'm not gonna recognize either one, or sorry, I'm gonna recognize both, and you guys are both excommunicated. Cyril and Nestorius were exiled. Um, now the difference is Cyril has more friends, and he has more important friends. So his important friends were the emperor. They're like, "Come on, Cyril's our friend. Here's some donations. Here's whatever you need."
Wait, really?
Yeah.
When you
So
say he was
Cyril,
exiled, does that literally mean he was removed to the monastery, or
yes, yeah.
okay?
So Cyril takes his spot back. Nestorius' excommunication is upheld. Antioch is upset. They keep the excommunication going um, for 2 years. So then Celestine, Rome, they tell Cyril, they're like, kind of, salihum, be friends with them again, like uh, try to figure out some kind of agreement with them or whatever. Cyril's like, okay. Theodoret, he writes this letter. It's called the Formula of Reunion. He writes it, and he's John of Antioch sends it to Cyril. Cyril reads the letter. He's like, okay, as long as this is interpreted within the context of the Council of Ephesus and the 12 anathemas, no problem. And that's how all the bishops on Cyril's side understood the letter. The Antioch side, how did they understand the letter? This letter replaces Ephesus and replaces the 12 anathemas, that we don't need to accept those anymore. This is by Cyril agreeing to this, he's repenting from that. And this is how they understood that letter. That
What indicated he agreed to it? Is it like sign at the bottom if you agree to it?
exactly.
Oh,
DocuSign.
really? Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, but it didn't. But and then each party interpreted his signature to mean something else.
Yes. He
Okay.
interpreted their
Why? What?
signature to be something, and
Oh,
they interpreted his signature to be something. Yeah.
they needed a contract lawyer, man.
They needed a council.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, and what makes it clear that they had different understandings of what these signatures meant?
The letter of Ibas that I mentioned earlier. The letter of Ibas, after that happened, Ibas sends his letter to the Church of the East, explaining to them the events. And his narrative is exactly what I just told you. That
Sorry,
Cyril
who's a boss?
Ibas was the bishop of Edessa. Edessa
Okay.
was the see under Antioch. Edessa was the bishop of Edessa traditionally would be the communication between the Church of Antioch and the Church of the East. That was
Okay.
kind of the way they would talk to each other. So Ibas told them, he told them, this is what happened. Cyril repented. We got this letter down, whatever. Right? There was no mention of the Council of Ephesus there. There's no mention of the 12 anathemas are mentioned as heretical in the letter. Okay. Now, everybody this was a huge waste of time because nothing got resolved in this whole controversy. That's the reality of it. And it gave us patristic precedents in hindsight, but in their time, nothing got resolved. So Cyril, he passes away in 444. His right hand man, his pick to succeed him, Dioscoros, becomes Pope of Alexandria, and Eutyches, who's a monk in Constantinople, he's there in Constantinople. He does something stupid, like he doesn't know if Jesus is consubstantial with us and the Father. He's like, he didn't know anything. He should have just not talked because he didn't know anything. But so there was a synod there, like a local synod, where the Patriarch of Constantinople, Flavian, who's one of those guys, he still wants someone from that school, John's school. He goes. So they have their own synod. They excommunicate Eutyches because Eutyches is unaware to say if he's consubstantial or not. He just kept saying, "I don't know what consubstantial means."
What's the context? Eutyches is where's
He's a
he
monk.
saying this? Like
He's a
he
monk
gives
in
a
Constantinople.
sermon or
He I don't know who he said it to. He's a
oh,
monk in
okay. So
Constantinople.
that's how like intense this is. If someone hears someone say something a little
Right?
off, like okay, this is very
Yeah, it's crazy.
all right.
So
So
Eutyches says
it
this.
just this lowly monk says something dumb,
Right.
comes back to Flavian.
Yeah.
eh,
So
Okay.
Eutyches says this, um, and then they excommunicate him. Flavian wants him to say Christ is in two natures. Eutyches says, but Cyril and Athanasius didn't teach us that. They taught us one nature, and they're like, okay, but is he consubstantial? And he's like, I don't know what that means. So then he gets excommunicated. Now Theodosius, the
So they
emperor,
were willing to let it go if he said yes, they're consubstantial.
no, because they're trying to prove that Eutyches was a heretic because he's saying that he's not willing to say the consubstantial part.
Right. Because he didn't understand what that meant.
Exactly.
But if he did and he said yes, would it have been dropped? Even though he said, I'm not going to say two natures?
I mean, if he was able to convince them that one nature was orthodox, but
Got
I
it.
don't know
Okay.
if they would have agreed with that. Yeah,
Okay.
because they were two nature guys. So then Theodosius was sad because he was friends with Eutyches, the emperor. It's the same guy. He was friends with Eutyches. He didn't want him to be excommunicated. So he called Dioscoros. He said, Dioscoros had an iPhone, I think. He
He seems
he
like more of an Android guy, though, to be
right?
honest. He's kind of a
So
rebel.
he told Dioscoros, he said, I want you to restore him. So we're going to do another council in Ephesus, and you're going to restore Eutyches there. So prepare for Eutyches an Orthodox confession of faith that he could just read off. Just let him read this, and then that's it. He's Orthodox. No one will doubt him anymore.
Why do you need a whole council just to do that?
Because he was
Maybe
deposed.
I'm overhyping what a council is, but
No,
like
no, you're right. You're right because it was the political situation. It was so sensitive that you had the capital of the empire, Constantinople, excommunicating the guy, and then Rome. Leo was pope in Rome at the time. Leo affirms the excommunication, so it's like you have two of the biggest churches saying this. Now you need to kind of do this big thing. So they
wait,
had,
so
yeah,
you had mentioned earlier, sorry to cut you off. You
okay.
mentioned earlier that the emperor of Constantinople is always buddies with the patriarch there.
Mhm.
Why didn't he just go direct to whoever
So
who was the
this
patriarch
time,
at the time? And
because Theodosius switched sides with the whole
Uh,
Cyril thing, so Theodosius became an Alexandria guy. It's very rare.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Alexandria and Constantinople, they have this rivalry. Like I counted them 7 times. Alexandria deposes the Constantinople patriarch. It's like the NBA playoffs, but instead of a 4-game sweep, it's a 7-game sweep. If it's 7 in a row, they
Yeah.
depose. It's
So why
crazy.
is that why Theodosius became like a Alexandria guy? Is just like they're dominating or
I think the
what?
Cyril thing won him over. Um,
Like he actually had an understanding of it?
I think
Or
so. Yeah, he's
okay,
canonized as a saint for us, the emperor.
got it. Okay.
So
So he
Cyril,
appeals to Dioscorus
yeah, he appeals
and
to
says,
him. He
Write him
appeal,
a write him a thing of faith."
yeah,
Uh-huh.
and so they're at the council. They're at the council, and this is like a legit council. Like everybody knows about it. Everyone's there. Leo sends his representatives. It's not like this underground hidden night council that Chalcedonians think it is. It's a legit council. Now, everything at the council is normal. Eutyches says the confession of faith. The people who are accused of heresy are asked to defend themselves. They choose not to talk. That's up to them. They plead the fifth or whatever when there is no Fifth Amendment at that time. And so there are people who are deposed absent because they were under house arrest. They weren't allowed to go to the council, like Theodoret Ibas.
Yeah. What does it mean to be deposed exactly?
Be removed from your position as a bishop, to be excommunicated from the church.
Okay. So it's not an interrogation like I think of a deposition where I'm
Oh,
asking
sorry. No,
questions.
no, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Like you're removed.
Okay. Do you
So
have notice ahead of time that you're going to be deposed?
because the guy who's presiding, if you like him or not. So, like for example, Theodoret, is he gonna is Cyril's right hand man gonna leave him in? Cyril wanted an excuse to get Theodoret out. There's no way they're gonna leave me in. Like
Mm.
it's by association. You know who your friends are.
Yeah. Okay.
So, so Theodoret and Ibas were under house arrest by the emperor before this, just for Nestorianism, automatically. And then, so they were under house arrest. They were deposed at the council, even though they weren't there. Dominus II, the nephew of John, who was now patriarch of Antioch, he was deposed. He was replaced. And then Flavian was deposed. Contrary to what a lot of people think, Flavian wasn't killed at the council. And Leo's tome was sent to the council to be read, which was the judgment of Eutyches. But why do you read the judgment before the trial? That doesn't make sense. That's what the trial's for. So then they didn't read the tome. They could have condemned the tome, but they didn't. That tells you something. They're like, okay, there is this diversity in communion. The Latins might be saying some weird stuff. We don't need to get into it. It's like in the margins. We can leave that for them. But if the council wanted, they could have just condemned the tome right there, and they didn't do that. That's very important to think about. Okay, now moving forward, the emperor dies. So again, Constantinople, there's a replacement bishop. Antioch, replacement bishop. The emperor dies. New emperor comes in. He wants to reconcile because Rome gets mad. 449, Ephesus. Leo gets really mad that his tome wasn't read. He excommunicated the whole East. So 450, the new emperor comes in, Marcion. He wants to reconcile Rome to the empire. He's like, "What do you want? Blank check." Leo tells him, "I want everybody to accept my tome because it's not an option. I intended this to be universally accepted. This is where papal infallibility comes from, by the way." And so the emperor is like, "Let's do a council for it in Nicaea." Leo's like, "We don't need to do a council. Just impose my tome on everybody." And then he's like, "Yeah, but I want to do a council because Nicaea, it's cool. I'll be like second Constantine to do it again." I was like, "Whatever." So then it was going to be at Nicaea. They go to Nicaea. they changed the location to Chalcedon, which is like another part of Constantinople. It's like across the
Mhm.
sea. So they're in Chalcedon. Dioscoros is being judged. All these guys are back. Theodoret, Ibas, uh, like all the guys who were deposed just off Leo's authority. So Leo automatically, like his papal authority, just is restoring everybody without them being canonically restored. So that tells you something about how he viewed himself and the papacy. And Dioscoros, I think you know the story. He kind of gets like blindsided by all his friends kind of betraying him. The Synod of Alexandria stays true, but everybody else they switch sides. And he doesn't show up to his own trial. He gets deposed, absent, not for heresy, just for not going.
How's it determined who gets a trial and who's just deposed? It sounds like a lot of people are deposed without trials.
Well, everybody gets a trial, but
Everybody gets a trial.
they have to summon them 3 times. If they don't show up after 3 times, they're deposed.
Are there actual like bylaws and rules, or is this just like good practice? Like, is there
Yeah,
a whole list of
there's
like?
there's
Yeah.
canons for this. The canons
Okay.
are that you have to call the judged person. There's a place where the judged are seated, and then there's the
Mhm.
place where the judges are. So then the judged person, you need to call him 3 times for him to show up. So Dioscoros was among the judged at Chalcedon.
And who's presiding at Chalcedon?
Rome and Anatolius and Maximus, the Patriarch of Constantinople,
Mhm.
Anatolius, and then Maximus, Patriarch of Antioch. These were Dioscoros's friends before this.
Mm.
Yeah, it's
When you
just
say friends, you mean they agreed with?
yeah. He put them there. He put them in these positions. Like he
Mm.
at Ephesus 2, he removed Constantinople and Orthodox patriarchs, and he
Right.
replaced them with his own guys. And then they switched on him. It's a very tragic council if you read Chalcedon. It's
Mm.
like, and you know me, like I didn't have a horse in the race going into this. Like I didn't know what the differences are. I didn't have my family is not either side, whatever. But when you read it, it's like there's no way this council is in agreement with the previous one. There's no way this is led by the Holy Spirit or whatever. This is a travesty that's happening. Like it's so
Yeah.
uncanonical on so many levels.
Why does friends flip on him?
Because so there was an agreement that if Constantinople uh, accepts the tome of Leo, then they can become the second highest see in the empire after Rome, whereas Alexandria used to be that before. So that's why Constantinople wanted to flip
Yeah.
for that reason. Antioch he could keep his see because the emperor would have removed him if he didn't.
Yeah. Why was Pope Leo hell-bent on his tome being adopted by everyone? Was it a like a personal, was it a pride thing, or he just thought like, hey, this theology, this Christology is gonna correct every did he actually believe that? This is like
Yeah, there was a lot of references before this all that he was a very aggressive pope, like more than normal. Like he wrote a letter to Dioscoros early on, like telling him when and when not to ordain priests. Like he was like micromanaging. And in 447 in Spain, he had councils to say there are two natures after the union. It's heretical to say one nature. He was a student of Augustine, and that's what Augustine believed, that there are two natures. And Augustine was friends with Theodore, who I talked about earlier. So Leo comes from that school.
so it's interesting, like theology within uh the land community can just change based on who's the pope, because the prior pope you were talking about, Pope Celestine, was with Cyril, right? Did he
Yeah,
was he
100%.
like was he fully comprehending what Cyril was saying in the dispute, and or
There's
you kind of implied that he kind of just got his letters first and
Yeah, there's a
it,
question
or,
about whether how strong a theologian Celestine was. But
mhm.
before him, Julius of Rome. was really, really, you know, in touch with that, and he backed up Saint Athanasius a lot. And Julius of Rome, his letters were read at Ephesus 1, where Julius is saying there's one nature very clearly.
Okay, so Pope Leo, student of Augustine, who was affiliated with Theodore,
Theodore. Yeah.
okay, and how did that happen? That's the
Uh,
Augustine Theodore connection.
that's a very good question. So there's scholarship on this. Theodore was just that big. He was very popular, and we can't imagine it today. Like Chrysostom, who is a big deal for us now, wasn't a big deal back then. Augustine wasn't a big deal back then, but Theodore was. Theodore was a huge deal. So like he was probably one of the most popular teachers in the Christian world at the time.
Okay,
Yeah.
and that when you say that, you mean like his preaching was just
His
popular.
biblical commentaries, his preaching. He was considered to be very brilliant.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. All right, so did you say why Dioscorus was deposed?
Because he didn't show up the thrice summons.
Okay, so three summoned 3 times and then deposed just for not showing up. And why
Yeah.
didn't he show up?
Because he realized this was a puppet council just to depose him. Like he had said, I can't say Christ is in two natures. I can say from two. So because Dioscorus said that, the definition of Chalcedon was going to be from two natures. They changed it just because Dioscorus said from two natures, because they can't agree with him. So they changed it to say in two natures, just so Dioscorus doesn't agree with it on purpose.
Mm,
So
got it.
Dioscorus kind of he figured it out, like this is a setup.
Okay. And how long, like how many days is this council going on for? Like how long are all these events happening? Is this a couple of days? Or are we talking a month?
No,
Like,
I think I can't remember exactly, but I want to say a month or so.
okay.
Yeah.
So you said he was supposed to go on trial and then he missed it. So then he summoned 3 times. He doesn't show. So then he's
Mhm.
deposed.
Yes.
And it's him and who else is deposed at this council? His supporters or
Uh let's see, was anyone else deposed? Oh, I think he's the only bishop who was.
okay.
Yeah, the Synod of Alexandria went back. They told them, "Hey, you guys can't leave without signing." So the Synod of Alexandria is like, "Well, it's out of our custom to sign without our pope. So let us go back to Egypt. We'll select the pope, and then we'll sign it and send it back to you." So they let them go, and they never signed till now. The
Okay.
Coptic Church has never signed. Yeah,
Got it.
yeah,
I I thought I read something different about them being afraid about being persecuted going back home. So
yeah. That's true.
it
They said if
okay.
we sign without our patriarch, we go back home. They're gonna kill us. The people.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah,
Man, it was real back then.
yeah.
Okay, so I think you just going back real quick on this missing 3 summons you get deposed.
Mhm.
But I think you said when Cyril deposed Nestorius, it was right away. It was right when he started the council.
Um, Cyril did it right away. He summoned him right like three times,
Oh,
knowing
okay.
he just
So
did it
it's
five.
3 summons right away. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm assuming that's just like, hey,
It's a
young boy,
formality.
go find the bishop and
Yeah,
bring him.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. So got okay. All right. So Dioscorus is deposed, and then what does that mean practically? Is he like locked up in jail? What
They
happens
exiled
next?
him to Gangra. I think it's an island or something, or maybe it's the Gangra in Bulgaria. I can't remember where it is. I looked it up before. I can't remember now. But they exiled him to Gangra. He was writing letters from Gangra still, and the Coptic Church recognizes him to have still been the Pope even when he was in Gangra until he died. I think 454, 455, something like that.
Okay, and you said Marcion is emperor at this time, right?
Yes.
Okay, so he goes like he just goes. He's cooperative. Like there's no account of him like
Oh,
cursing
he's
them on the
loving
way
he's
out.
loving it because all he wanted was Leo to be happy, and that's what he got.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I'm talking about Marcion. I'm talking about Dioscorus.
Oh, oh, what
Like
about him?
there during this process where like you get deposed and you get exiled. Is there accounts or records of him like rebelling, or is he just cooperating?
He
Like, all right, this is what you guys
he's
decided.
he's not concerned with that. He's concerned with Christology. So Dioscoros now is writing about the one nature, and he's writing about why we can't accept two natures, and saying in two natures is wrong, from two natures is right. He's thinking about orthodoxy more than he's thinking about what's happening to him.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so do they replace him immediately with another bishop?
The Orthodox don't. The emperor tries to, but when the guy gets there, he was killed. I forgot his name. Um,
He
yeah,
was killed?
yeah. The
Wow.
the Copts, the Egyptians were not having it, so they
Man.
lynched. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Um, and then what happens? Is there a
And
period
then
where
after Dioscoros reposes, they elect a new
oh,
pope, and there's no like look all the Chalcedonian policies, all the persecutions, all that stuff. It doesn't touch Egypt for like 100 years because they can't like the whole province is non-Chalcedonian. Like what are you gonna do? You're gonna lose all of Egypt,
right. So
the breadbasket
the
of that
yeah,
province.
so the goal of unity in the empires, so it's that ship has sailed at this point, right?
For the time being, the 20 years or so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
the 20 years after, within 20 years, all the Eastern churches become non-Chalcedonian again. 20 years after this. So very, very soon, everyone's like, "Yeah, this is stupid. Let's go back to being non-Chalcedonian."
uh, okay, so all these figures we're talking about here, these characters, Cyril, Dioscorus, Leo, Theodoret, yada yada. It's a long list. The emperors. I mean, are these good guys, bad guy? I mean, this is a broad question, but is
Yeah,
everybody here trying to do the right thing and good? Obviously, you know.
I I don't think anybody didn't have. Um, I mean, I was gonna say I don't think anyone didn't have conviction, but then I remembered Theodoret and I changed my mind. So a lot of the people involved had conviction one way or the other. Um, but you would have like very obvious political moves, like Theodoret is at Chalcedon. They're asking him, hey, condemn Nestorius. And Theodoret goes, "Yeah, I condemn Nestorius and Eutyches and anybody who would dare to say that Christ has two sons." But Nestorius didn't say Christ has two sons, and you know that, Theodoret. And
Mm-mm.
and what else? He goes, "I was he Theodoret. This is what the Chalcedonians quote to be Theodoret's repentance." Theodoret said at Chalcedon, "I was Orthodox and my teachers were Orthodox." Who's his teacher? Theodore. So that's his repentance. I was
Mm.
Orthodox and my teachers were Orthodox. Imagine you're telling your father of confession, or you're in confession, you're telling Abuna, Abuna, this is my confession to you, is I wasn't wrong. Is that a
Yeah,
repentance? Not repentance.
yeah,
So, um, but so there are like if you're looking at this, you're trying to be objective. Like I think I was before I chose a side. Um, I think if you're doing that, it's obvious who is being like sincere to the tradition that they received before and who has a
yeah,
political gain from this.
yeah. So You kind of brought up this point about papal supremacy
Mhm.
with Leo. Is that what you're saying when it like really started to be a concept?
I would say so. I mean, obviously, my Roman Catholic friends would disagree. They would say it's earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There are hints at it earlier, like with Pope Victor in the 2nd century, um, with the situation that happened with the whole Meletius thing and Sardica and whatever in the 4th century. So it's there are like instances where arguments can be made, but I think Leo makes the most explicit case.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And does everybody, or I guess it would be a majority of people, kind of going along with them? Does that bolster the argument that Rome was supreme, or was it just coincidence? So, well, we just
So
actually just agree with them.
yeah, they have a rule. Well, there's two things I want to say about that. They have a rule that the faith is that which was preached by all everywhere. So in Egypt, in Syria, how come nobody told us that we have to be in communion with the Bishop of Rome to be in the church? How come they didn't? They told us about the Eucharist, the sacraments, the priesthood, the Trinity, Christology, but nobody told us about we have to be with Rome to be in the church. No one told us that. How is that dogma then? That's number one. Number two, the majority, it doesn't mean it's right because that part of the world didn't have the persecution that we had. Timur in history, the warlord, he killed over 14 million of our people in our church. That's the biggest genocide nobody ever talks about. The Church of the East used to be the biggest church out of all of us. Now it's the smallest. But when it was the biggest, we didn't think like, oh, well, they're the biggest. Maybe they're right. So it's just
Hmm.
because if you're in Western Europe, if you're in the Western Hemisphere, you're not under the same circumstances that our people are in.
Got it.
We have 100
How,
million. It's not like we're like tiny, but
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I've heard. I mean, I can't really think of a specific example, but I feel like I've heard back. I asked you about characters here and their actual character. I've
Yeah,
heard not nice things about Dioscorus. Do you know what I'm referencing? Like,
exactly.
I feel
Yeah,
like I've heard someone say that he fought somebody. I don't know
right.
if I'm
That's the
like,
Flavian thing I mentioned earlier.
oh, okay, okay,
I was saying,
yeah.
the thing with Flavian, like they accused him of killing Flavian at Ephesus. So the thing with Flavian is Nestorius, who out of all people, he comes to the rescue in this. He writes about it. He says the soldiers, when Flavian was in exile, they're the ones who killed Flavian way after the council. So imagine after the council, Flavian is writing letters to Leo telling him this is what happened at Ephesus, this is what they did, saying everything. He never once mentions that anybody was violent with him or anybody hit him. He never mentions it one time. And he's writing letters, so he has the ability to do that. So how is that then possible? And Nestorius is a witness who hates us. How is it possible for us to be the killers of Flavian? It doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
You see what
Okay.
I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do we have a alternative theory about who killed him?
Yeah, it's the soldiers. The soldiers killed, like Nestorius says, the soldiers when Flavian was in exile, the soldiers killed uh, Flavian.
Okay, but motive, like, just
They're just bully soldiers. They probably just
okay.
got pissed off. Yeah. So
Okay, different
Chadwick,
time, man. No
yeah,
civil rights. Got it.
Chadwick writes about it. He says the injuries were not fatal, but like for a regular person, it's just
Mm,
like he wasn't given the opportunity to heal from the injuries, and that's why he died.